Father, we love you. We thank you for your grace, and we ask you to be with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, family. You can go ahead and start turning in your Bibles to Genesis. If you haven't grabbed the handouts out there, please let me know, and we'll try to get those into your hands. There's 3 handouts out there today. So there is the PowerPoint slides for today, and then there is the Exodus overview, as well as the chapter synopsis as well. So again, I can't stress it enough. Please, 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 if you only do one thing, as part of the study, then do the chapter synopsis in your own handwritings, what it is that God showed you. Please don't fill up those spaces with the things that I think and the things that I've said. You hear enough about the things that I have to say. What you need to have is what the Lord himself has shown you over the course of this study, so that by the end of 3 years, that is what you will have. You will have an entire book filled with the things that the Lord has shown you. So, again, we're finishing up Genesis tonight. Next week, we will have the Q&A and long-form discussion for the points that you would like to raise, all the many things that I ran past, and you should have notebooks filled with things that I ran past that we didn't have a chance to discuss, or questions you would like to have addressed that we can talk. Not that I have all the answers, but again, we are sharing thoughts together as we continue to seek towards the Lord and what it is that he wishes to show and reveal to us at any given moment. But today we are starting in chapter 37. And as we were last time, we have at the beginning this kind of bleed over from one patriarch to the next patriarch. But that sort of changes now. Because as we start to go through these last few chapters, starting in verse 37, you would think, if you've read all the way through Genesis, well, this is the story of Joseph. And it kind of is, sort of, but not really. You see, Jacob is the last of the patriarchs. Joseph, for all his wonderful attributes, is not a patriarch. It's more accurate to say that the end of Genesis isn't the story of Joseph. It's the story of Jacob's kids, of the sons of Jacob, and what it is that's going to happen to them. And this is what we pick up with in chapter 37, and we're going to see Joseph as the focal point of a lot of the things that are going on, but it's not really just the story of Joseph. And again, as wonderful as Joseph is, it's a story really of 2 of the kids, Joseph and Judah. Joseph and Judah. And Joseph and Judah are going to be the leaders, the pinnacle of our focus as we go through these last chapters. But it's done by showing us Jacob's heart for Joseph, and that's how we get thrown into it. In the first couple of verses of 37, we have this introduction to the last portion of Genesis as we start to focus in on the kids of Jacob. But then immediately we're told this in verses 2 through 4, how much Joseph was loved by Jacob. Joseph was about 17 years old at this time. And one day, while shepherding with his brothers, he brought back a negative report about his brothers. Not Benjamin. Benjamin's always being kept kind of close to Jacob. But he brings back a negative report about his brothers as they were all out there shepherding the flock. Obviously, this begins to estrange him immediately to the rest of his brothers. But then we're told this, that Jacob loved Joseph the most because he was the son of his old age. And, if we're reading between the lines just a bit, most likely because he was the firstborn son of the wife Jacob loved the most. And as a token of this affection, what Jacob does is he gives Joseph this magnificent robe. Now, the Hebrew word that we have here, we're not really 100% sure what it means. Not exactly. It could mean a multicolored robe. It could mean a full-length robe, meaning that the sleeves were full length, which is not something that you would do if you worked out in the fields. Instead, if you were worked out outside a lot, that you would have very short sleeves or you have no sleeves at all. The fact that he had long sleeves, if that's what's going on, meant that he was kind of in this overseer position. It's kind of like wearing a tie to work. You don't wear a tie to work if you work outside. Or it could mean that the robe was richly ornamented. Again, we're not sure which of those options it was, but that's not the point of the robe. The point of the robe was to show that Jacob loved Joseph the most. And Joseph's brothers hated him precisely because of this reason, not because he had a robe that they didn't, but because they saw that their father loved Joseph more. It was an affection, a favoritism that was obvious on the outside, and Jacob, of all the people in the family, should have understood. He should have remembered what a parent's favoritism does to a family, he should remember that this is what tore his family apart, that caused him to run away from his brother, for him not to even be there when his mom passed away. But this becomes the foundation, and into this we learn that Joseph starts to have these dreams. And the first dream is that he and his brothers were out binding sheaves, so they're in this agricultural setting. And the wheat had been cut down, so what they would do is they would bundle up the sheaves of wheat, and they would tie them off, and then they would carry the bundles back to wherever they were going to do the winnowing process, and it would allow it just to be easier to get everything back to the location. As they were binding these sheaves, his sheaf rose up. So the bundle of wheat that he had all of a sudden stands up on his ends, and the other ones stand up, and then they all bow down to his sheaf. Now, it's just something to be aware of. The first dream that we have with Joseph has this agricultural setting of wheat. It's something that's going to be important later on in the life of Joseph when he interprets the dreams for Pharaoh. But this is the first one, and he tells his brothers this, and this is one of the shortcomings of Joseph. It's not necessarily a sin, but it's just the immaturity of youth. The immaturity of youth says that I have a thought, and everyone needs to hear the thought that I have to say. That's the danger of social media. It gives everybody a megaphone, whether you've earned the megaphone or not. And Joseph hasn't learned one of the great lessons of adulthood that some of us learn, not all of us still learn. But if you would just be quiet, people would think you're smart. But Joseph doesn't understand that, so he starts talking. The brothers are mad. He has a second dream. Now this time, there's more players. There's the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. And the implication in the text is that he has the 12th star. So there's 12 stars, the sun, and the moon. This time he goes and he tells his dad about the dream. And his dad understands the meaning of this dream, that what you're saying is that your whole family, including who are over you, the sun and the moon, are going to bow down to you. And Jacob kicks just a little bit back against Joseph on this, which tells you how offensive the dream was, that he starts yelling at his favorite. But then he kind of hides these things away in his heart. It's very reminiscent of something that's going to happen in the New Testament with Mary. And this is where I want to start to introduce an idea that we will not be able to fully flesh out today. And that is the very real imagery that Joseph is as a type of Jesus in the New Testament. Joseph is unique in all of the New Testament. I think the only image, if we can use that terminology, that surpasses Joseph as far as how similar he is to Christ, the different aspects of him that are going to remind us of Jesus. The only one that surpasses Joseph is the tabernacle, which we'll get into in our study of Exodus. It's the only one. Tabernacle has no equal, but Joseph is very special. And it starts here in this dynamic about this parent who hides these things in their heart about these things that are said about their child. But the next one comes up right immediately when we're told that Joseph is sent by his father to go look for his brothers for the purpose of checking on the welfare of the brothers and the flock. Now stop right there. We won't have time to show all the ways that Joseph is like a type of Jesus. But this is one we need to start paying attention to early on, because the other ones will start clicking, I hope, as we go through the text. And what we see is a father sending his son to go check on the welfare of his family. We're going to see this a couple of times in the earthly ministry of Jesus. Jesus is even going to tell a parable about this person, this master who owns this bit of land, and he rents it out to people, and he starts sending servants because it's time for the harvest. I need my cut. And instead of giving that produce over, what they do is they start to beat and they start to kill the servants, and he goes, I'll send my son. At least him they'll respect. And they said, oh, here's the son. We're going to see the same terminology in a minute. Look at that dreamer. Here he comes. Let's kill him, and then it'll be ours. We'll see this twice happen in the earthly ministry of Jesus, when twice he will go to the temple. But the second time, it's most broken down for us that we know what he's going to do is he is going to see if there is spiritual life in the temple. He is sent by the Father to go check on his family and to check the welfare of the flock. As he is approaching the brothers, they refer to him again as this dreamer. They plot to kill him. And then they go, then we will see what will happen to his dream. It shows how bitter they are about this dream that he had. And Reuben stops them from killing the brother. And they go, listen, let's not do that. He's our flesh. We shouldn't do this thing that you guys are thinking about. Let's do this instead. Let's throw him into a pit. And then technically, we're going to have a lot of this in a moment. Technically, we didn't kill our brother. We didn't do anything to him. We just threw him in a pit that had no water or no food. And whatever happens next, that's up to God. What we're told in this moment is that he did this hoping to deliver Joseph from their hands. He knew what they were going to do was wrong. He wanted to be able to deliver his dad's favorite kid back to his dad. So the idea is that they've been roaming around. Again, they're nomadic in this lifestyle of raising the flocks. And so they couldn't be in any one place for too long because sheep are among the dumbest of all the pasture animals. And what they will do is they will eat all of the grass, and then they'll eat the roots of the grass, and then they will be too dumb to go look for more grass. So you have to keep moving when you're raising them. So what he was hoping is that they would go move again. He's gone here in a minute. The idea may be that he's going to scout new places that they're going to go. And then when the brothers move the flock, he'll come back and get Joseph out of it and get Joseph home. That sounds great until you stop to realize that he lacks the moral courage to tell them to stop it altogether. So Reuben is gone, and the brothers are sitting down to have something to eat while Joseph is in the pit. We're told later on that he was crying out to them. They knew the agony. They could see the agony on his face as he was pleading with them not to do this thing. And as they're sitting there, we're told that this caravan of Ishmaelites, so relatives of the family of Abraham, the Ishmaelites are coming down, and they're heading toward Egypt. Judah remarks, you know what, there's no profit if we just kill him out here in the wilderness. So let's do this. Let's sell him to the caravan that's going down to Egypt. And that way, again, we make a little money, and we did not kill our brother, and we got rid of him. Judah further states that this way they get rid of Joseph, but will not have to lay their hands on Joseph, who is their own flesh, and they sell Joseph into the hands of the Midianite traders who are part of the caravan for 20 shekels of silver. And again, you see the imagery of Jesus, not the exact coinage amount, but the fact that he is sold by his family, by his brothers, into the hand of Gentiles for money. And they take Joseph down to Egypt. Now, Reuben comes back, verses 29 through 35. He finds that Joseph is missing from the pit, and he despairs to him and says, "What have you done?" Together, they concoct the lie that Joseph was killed by a wild beast. So what they do is they slaughter a goat of the flock, so their father's goat. They dip the robe, so their father's robe, the one that he gifted to Joseph, a manifestation of the father's love for him, and they dip it into the blood so as to deceive the father. Now note the symmetry, or the symmetry that we have here. What did the mother of Jacob do when they went to deceive Isaac? They used the Esau's garments. They used the goats of Isaac's flock in order to deceive Isaac. So where are they learning these bad habits? What the son sees the dad do, the son does too. It doesn't stop. It goes all the way to the end of Genesis. So what they do is they take this bloody robe, and now they go and they present it to their father. And they go, "Listen, we found this. You tell us if this is your son's robe." So that way, technically, they didn't lie to their dad. They didn't say a wild animal did this to your favorite son. Instead, they let Jacob make that leap, that conclusion. And he goes, "Surely this is Joseph. Something has happened to him. Some wild animal has destroyed him." And he begins to grieve in sackcloth and refuses to be comforted by his sons and his daughters, and none of his kids tell him the truth. Joseph is sold to Potiphar, the Pharaoh's officers, the captain of the bodyguard, and we begin to turn to chapter 38. But I want you to notice something right here. This is the beginning of a three-time event where garments are going to play an important role inside the life of Joseph. And two of the times that garments appear in the life of Joseph, it is going to be used to lie against Joseph. The garment itself will be used to bear a false witness against the truth about Joseph. But in chapter 38, suddenly everything switches. We have this interesting moment now with Judah. I mean, it doesn't make any sense until you reach the end and you understand that these two are going to become this very powerful image of Jesus when they're joined together. But we need to see how wicked Judah starts off. It's the only way to understand later on when we do see him and he does something very selfless, how out of character this is for Judah. But what we're told is that Judah will marry a Canaanite woman. This is a break from everything that's happened before. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will all marry women from the Babylon area, from the area where Abraham was from. Suddenly that stops. We're told specifically Judah marries a Canaanite woman, and now he starts to have sons, and he marries the oldest off, and he marries the oldest off to Tamar. We're told that was evil in the sight of the Lord, so God took his life. We're not told why or what it is that he'd done, but for whatever reason, God decided to take his life. So even then, at the time, the custom was that the next oldest in line was to go into his brother's wife and to raise up children to his name so that that line would not end. So he gives Tamar to the second oldest, and we're told he was wicked too. And we're told the manifestation of this in this time, because the idea was he was supposed to get Tamar pregnant so that that line, the oldest line, Er's line, would continue to have children. What he does is he uses Tamar for his own sexual satisfaction, but he will not impregnate her. He takes her, he abuses her for what he wants. But then he does it in such a manner to make sure that she will not be taken care of, because this was going to be her welfare into old age. This is how she was going to be provided for, but he didn't care. How does this benefit me? How is this going to fill my pockets? So he does this, and then God judges that, and he specifically judges this action that says, I use you, and I take what is precious and vulnerable about you, and I use it to benefit me. And I do it in such a way that I cannot possibly bless you in return. Now Judah's getting nervous. He's got a third son. And what he tells Tamar is, listen, my third one's not old enough yet. So what I want you to do is I want you to go live in your father's house, and whenever my third oldest gets old enough to marry you and all that, then we'll go ahead and do that, and then she goes away. Well, nothing happens. Verses 12 through 26, we're told that Judah's wife, Shua, dies, and after an appropriate time of mourning, we're told Judah is going about business as usual. He's going down to the sheep shearers. And as he is traveling down that way, Tamar, who is in the household of her father, hears about this. And we're told that she's in widow garments because she changes out of the widow's garments and she puts on a veil. So she's doing everything she's supposed to do. She's being righteous in all of this. She's widow. She's waiting for this promise from Judah, but she has seen, and that is part of the text, she sees that the third oldest was old enough and he was not given to her as a husband. So she puts on a veil, and we're told in verse 15 that this is the dress of a prostitute. She was covering herself, so it would be like the image of sexual desire without the identity of it. So she's there in this veil along the way, and some of the scholars believe that this particular area was an idol-worshiping place. So as he's coming down the road and he understands what this place, he mistakes her for a temple prostitute. So he says, listen, let me go ahead and engage you in this relationship. And she goes, well, what's going to be my pay? He goes, well, I'm going to go shear my sheep. So I'm going to have money here in a minute. So I'll tell you what. When I get down there, I'm going to send you back a goat or a sheep or something like that. And she goes, well, how do I know you're going to do this? And so what he does is he gives her a cord and a staff. Now, the cord wasn't just like a cord that he carried around. What it would have on it is a signet ring. So it was a sign of his identity and his authority. We'll see that later on when she produces the signet ring. She goes, okay, that'll work. And so she receives that, and he goes into her, and then they have relations, and then as he goes away, she goes back to her father's house, and she puts back on the garments of a widow. It shows her heart. It shows what it was that she was planning. It wasn't that she was going to change occupations into this new thing. And she definitely was not seeking just gratification of the body. She was looking for the part that he owed to her. The welfare of her old age, the care that he was supposed to provide for her. She married into his family. It should have been Judah's heart to make sure that she was taken care of, but he doesn't, and then 3 months later, word reaches him that Tamar has played the harlot because she's pregnant. 3 months later, so conceivably she's starting to show just a little bit. She can't hide the fact that she's pregnant, and we see how Judah responds in verse 24. He cries out, bring her out of her father's house and let her be burned. Now, that's a little drastic, don't you think? But this is what he wants. This is what he's demanding. This is not justice according to the Old Testament. This is justice according to Judah. And so as Tamar is being brought out of the house to be burned, she sends word to Judah, and she sends the signet ring. So that's attached to the cord. Sends the signet ring and says, the father is the man to whom this belongs. And as soon as he sees it, he knows exactly what happened. He recognizes it, and he confesses that Tamar is more righteous than he. Says he doesn't have relations with her. Again, he doesn't then go and marry because of it, but she goes back to her father's home, but now she's pregnant with the children of Judah, and we're told that she has 2 children, and one of them is Perez, and Perez is in the Messianic line. Now think about that for just a second. The Savior, the one who died for all of our sins, came out of this. This ugly, messy, disgusting story. And the Savior comes out of this. He doesn't just come out of it, he redeems it. He elevates it to something that it could never be on our own. And these are those indications of what it is that our Jesus does. And this is how important these last few chapters are, how special they are, what it is that our God does. But now we have this incident with Judah, and we see at the end of it how God will redeem all ends. But then it stops and it goes back to Joseph. But we needed that moment to understand just how wicked the heart of Judah was. But now, chapter 39, we go back to Joseph, and we're told he's inside Potiphar's house. Potiphar is one of the officials for Pharaoh. And we're told that God just shined his face on everything that he did. There was just nothing that he did that God did not bless. Thank you, Mr. Pedro. Joseph is blessed with favor in Potiphar's house, and he was so blessed, and he was so blessed that he kind of just gave everything over to Joseph. And we're told that the only thing that Potiphar concerned himself about was the actual food that he was eating in that given second. Now think about how wonderful that is. To have someone so trustworthy and so capable inside your retinue, if you will, that you didn't have to worry about anything except the food that you happen to be eating at that exact second. We're told that Joseph was handsome in form and in an appearance. He's in his late teens, early 20s here. And Potiphar's wife desired Joseph and told him to lay with her. Now, Joseph refuses. Young man, all of the hormones that are going through a young man at this time, and he says, I simply cannot. Because my master, Potiphar, has given me charge over everything in this house. The only thing he has asked me not to touch is you. So I can't do that. But then he goes a step beyond that. He further adds in verse 9, I cannot commit this great evil and sin before God. Now stop for a moment. Don't you think if anyone felt like they were owed just a little bit of grace, it might be Joseph? If anyone thought they could just blur the edges of sin just a tiny bit, it might be him. But even in captivity, even after being betrayed by his family, he still does not deny his relationship with the God of his fathers. He keeps his faith in God even though he was in these conditions. But Potiphar's wife was not used to being told no. He's a powerful man. I can have what I want. You're nothing but a slave. So she continues to try to seduce Joseph, but he continues to refuse. And then one day she goes and she grabs him by his outer garments. So he's wearing some kind of robe or tunic or something like that, and we'll find out in a second that he's got nothing else on underneath it. And the idea of grabbing, the Hebrew word that is used, means to seize. And again, we'll find out in just a second that she's holding onto this garment so tightly, when he goes to run, he has to make a decision between going clothed or going naked. She says, lie with me, still demanding the same thing, and he flees from her, and such was her grip on his clothes that she held onto the clothes, and he fled without them. And then she began to cry out that Joseph tried to rape her, but she screamed, and he fled. Suddenly we see all this bitterness is now raging within her. She's been denied, she's been rebuked, and now in this way, in her head, she's been embarrassed as well. Because he would rather do that and run out in this condition than be with me. So she gives out this allegation. She even tells the other slaves that are in the house, look, he brought this Hebrew in here to mock us, and look at what he's done now. And then we're told that she sits there with the clothes next to her until Potiphar comes home. Such is the anger that's within her, the bitterness that was in her. And when Potiphar comes home, she holds up the garment and says, see what this Hebrew did. And now we have the second time that his clothes were used to deliver a false report about him. Potiphar sees the clothes and he hears the allegations, and we're told that his anger burned. Now, some say that his anger was against his wife and not against Joseph. And the assertion comes from the idea that Joseph was not executed for attempted rape. I mean, if he was mad, why didn't he just have Joseph killed off? I mean, that makes sense. It's something we see in the Old Testament if someone is, if there's a rape or an attempted rape. And instead, he's put in the king's prison, which they allege is a cushier prison experience. And that's totally inconsistent with the text. In Psalm 105, when their psalmist is writing about Joseph. It says that Joseph, he was sold as a slave. They afflicted his feet with fetters. He himself was laid in irons. That doesn't sound like a cushy experience. And we know furthermore, when he talks about being in the king's prison, he talks about it being like being in a dungeon or a pit. And the word he uses for dungeon or pit is the exact same word for the cistern that his brothers threw him in, hoping that he would die in the bottom of the pit. Regardless, he is cast into the king's prison. But again, the Lord was with Joseph. God showed him kindness. And Joseph received favor in the sight of the chief jailer, to the point that the chief jailer put everything into his hands and didn't worry about anything that was under Joseph's guard. It shows how much God blesses him, what gifting he gave him to be a steward even under the most difficult of circumstances. And this one prisoner who's trusted more than all of the other prisoners is how we end chapter 39 and how we begin chapter 40. As Joseph will meet the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Now, we're told that these two individuals come into the prison. They had found displeasure in the eyes of Pharaoh, and the popular thought is that there was some kind of assassination attempt on the Pharaoh. They had discovered poison in the food or something like that. But these two would both have had access near the end when Pharaoh would actually touch a drink or food. And the idea is that with this assassination attempt, they don't know which of the two are guilty. So they've both been put into the king's prison until they figure out and the investigation is carried out. One day they wake up and Joseph comes in and he can see from the outside, from their countenance, that they were sad. And he goes to him and he says, "What's going on? Why are you so upset?" And it's beautiful that Joseph is in prison and still his heart is for others. It's still not for himself. They tell Joseph that they both had dreams and there was no one to interpret them. This implies they both understood the dreams had weight, they had a meaning. And Joseph responds that interpretations belong to God, and then he gently asks them to tell him their dreams. Now notice again the heart of Joseph here. He doesn't go, "Well, you want to hear about a bad story? You want to hear about being in jail and being wrongfully accused?" He doesn't do any of that. It's not about him in this moment. He's got that heart of an intercessor, of a counselor here. He cares more about the one that he's trying to reach. And so gently, he doesn't even demand, "Well, just tell me your dreams and I'll tell you what they're about. I got work to do." He gently prompts them. The cupbearer goes first, verses 9 through 15. And he tells Joseph the dream, and Joseph tells him, "All right, the 3 branches are 3 days that you see in your dream. And this means that in 3 days, you're going to be restored to your former position." Joseph then asks that when the cupbearer is restored to his position, then please mention me to Pharaoh, mention my plight to Pharaoh, that I was kidnapped, I was wrongfully accused, I was put in a dungeon, again, that specific word, and see if you can get me out. Now, notice the amount of confidence Joseph has to have in this interpretation when he asks for the cupbearer for these things beforehand, 3 days beforehand. Because if Joseph is wrong about any aspect of it, this cupbearer is not going to remember him later on. But he does. He has such confidence in what he's been told by the Lord and what it is that he's telling to the cupbearer that he wages his future freedom on the interpretation coming true. Now, the chief baker is hearing this, verses 16 through 19, and we're told that when he heard that the cupbearer received a favorable report, it kind of shows that maybe he was waiting to see because he was worried about the interpretation of his dream. Maybe he knew his guilt and he understood what was going on. But regardless, when he heard that the cupbearer received a favorable report, he tells Joseph the dream, but he gets a vastly different interpretation. Joseph tells the baker that the 3 baskets that were on your head are 3 days. Again, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. We see this image of 3 days going all the way back to Abraham and Isaac. 3 days until they went to the mountain where Isaac was to be sacrificed. 3 days, how long Jacob ran from Laban before he was caught up. 3 days with the cupbearer, 3 days with the chief baker. And Joseph tells him in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift your head off of your body. And he's going to hang your body up in the air, and then the birds of the air are going to come and pick the flesh off of your bones. Verses 20 through 22, everything happens exactly as Joseph declared it. But the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. Instead, we're told he forgot about him. Now, chapter 41, now Pharaoh has a dream. And we have this repeat of two dreams, two dreams, two dreams. So Joseph has two dreams. The cupbearer and the chief baker together have two dreams. Now Pharaoh's going to have two dreams. So we have this repeat of witnesses happening. That's important. We see it all the way through the Bible. But 2 full years go by, and then Pharaoh wakes up one morning. He's had two dreams. In dream number 1, he sees 7 fat cows come up out of beautiful, strong imagery. The Nile was the strength of Egypt. It's where all life was considered of coming out of, because they didn't have rainfall in the way that we do, so they required a series of canals to act as their irrigation that all flowed out of the Nile. And out of this Nile, the fountain of life for them, he sees 7 fat cows come out. And then behind him, he sees 7 ugly, gaunt cows, very skinny. So it's the idea of being starving. You know, you can see their bones as they're coming up out of it. And then these 7 skinny cows come up, and they eat the 7 fat cows. But here's the scary part. It doesn't look like it. The skinny cows are just as skinny as they get started. And we're told Pharaoh wakes up. He's upset, but then he goes back to sleep, and he has dream number 2. This time, he's looking at maybe a field of wheat, but he sees 7 plump ears of grain. These are beautiful ears of grain like you would see in a movie. You could see the ears of grain that are on top of this single stalk. And then he sees 7 thin heads of grain, and we're told that they're scorched by the east wind. So this would have been a piece of grain that was wilted, that maybe one side of it was burned. It was scorched by the hot winds blowing across the Middle East. And then the 7 thin ears would swallow up the 7 plump and full ears, but again, it doesn't look like it. Because all that's left at the end of it are the 7 skinny, thin heads of grain scorched by the east wind. Now, we're told he wakes up, and he calls the magician and the wise men, and he asks them, interpret my dream. And they can't tell him anything. Nobody could. And in my mind, I wonder, couldn't they at least venture a guess? I mean, if someone just came up to you and told you some crazy dream, you can take some kind of guess about what's going on. It's not like what we're going to see later with Nebuchadnezzar, where he goes, no, you tell me the dream and the interpretation, because I can't trust you guys, because you'll just make something up. For whatever reason, either they couldn't make up anything, or whatever they said, they knew, yeah, this is not the interpretation. And into this moment, verses 9 through 13, the cupbearer suddenly remembers Joseph, and he says, you remember when you were mad at me a couple years ago? When I was in prison, I had this dream, and it upset me. I didn't know the meaning of it. I even woke up in the morning, and I was visibly upset because there was no one to give me an interpretation of it, and there just happened to be this Hebrew kid in the prison. And he came up, and he told me and the chief baker the meaning of our dreams, and everything happened exactly as he said it would. So Pharaoh hears this, verses 14 through 32, and he calls for Joseph. And Joseph is brought out of the dungeon. Again, the same word, same as the pit from chapter 37. This is the description of the prison that he was in. But he goes before Pharaoh after he's been good and cleaned up. And Joseph says to him, I have a dream, and I've heard that you can interpret it. Joseph replies so humbly here. It's the same kind of attitude we're going to see later in Daniel chapter 2. He says, it's not me. I can't interpret your dream. But God will give a favorable answer. So Pharaoh tells Joseph the 2 dreams, and Joseph replies, the 2 dreams are one and the same. Now remember, he's going to say it again at the end to make sure we understand what he's saying is true. The 2 dreams are one and the same. They're not 2 separate dreams. They're one dream, but given in 2 different facets. And they are both God telling Pharaoh what he was about to do. And what he's saying is there's going to be 7 years of great abundance. Great abundance. They're going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of famine will be so great, it will wipe out the memory of the 7 good years. It's not just equal so we end up with the same at the end. It's going to be so much, it eats into all the abundance that came before until nothing is left unless you do something about it. And the reason that God is giving you 2 different dreams to tell you the exact same thing is because the matter is settled by God. So the first dream becomes the message. The second dream becomes the confirmation. And it continues the line we're going to have all the way through Exodus, through Leviticus, and it is an important idea all the way to the very end of Revelation. Let every single matter be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. And what the second dream that we keep seeing in all these places, it's not just God being redundant, it's grace. It's God saying, I need you to get this. I need you to understand. I don't want to just crush the nation. I don't want to send you all into dust. I want to save you. I want to save you, so I'm going to tell you twice. This has been settled by God, and it is coming quickly. Joseph then gives counsel to Pharaoh, verses 33 through 36. And Joseph says, Pharaoh, okay, you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you what I think you should do. You need to look for a wise and discerning person to set over the land. Let them be in charge of gathering a portion of the food that's going to happen over the course of the next 7 years, and let that food become a reserve during the famine so the land will not pass away. He doesn't say, listen, you need to tell all the people they need to save a little bit for the lean times that are coming. You can't trust them. They didn't have the dream. They don't have the responsibility. They don't have the relationship with God. So if you put it on the people, they're going to end up with nothing because they're going to squander it away during the 7 good years. And when the 7 lean years come, now there's no reserve. You need to send somebody. Why? Because God gave you the dreams. He gave you the responsibility. You experienced the weight of knowing this meant something, so now you have to be the one to do something about it. So you, Pharaoh, establish somebody to act as the overseer over this so that the land will not pass away. And then verses 37 through 45, Pharaoh hears his plan. He goes, yep, that sounds great. So what we're going to do is this. You are going to be in charge, Joseph. You are going to be in charge of this. Since Joseph received the interpretation, he should be placed in charge of the land. We don't even know if Pharaoh knows anything about what a good steward he was over Potiphar's house and over the prison by this point. But he knows, is there anybody that we can get that's going to be like Joseph? So he places Joseph in charge of the land. He even tells him, listen, only myself will outrank you. You will be over everybody else. That just so happens to include Potiphar and his wife if they're still alive. But he sets Joseph over the land. He puts his ring on Joseph's finger, so it's a sign of Pharaoh's authority. And then he does this. He clothes Joseph in fine clothing. He's no longer in the clothing of a slave or a servant. He's now in the clothing of a prince or an overseer. And this is the third time that clothing is used in the life of Joseph. But this time it's to elevate. The previous two were down, but with one moment, here comes the authority, and he lifts Joseph out of all of it, and he establishes him, as we'll see later, over his brethren. Do you see the parallels with Jesus? Verses 46 through 49, we're told how faithful a steward Joseph is. He is 30 when all of this happened, so he's been 13 years in slavery and in a dungeon. What's interesting is that the age, 30 years old, is the age that a priest can begin service in a tabernacle. That's Numbers chapter 4. It's the age when David became king, 2 Samuel chapter 5, and it's the age when Jesus began his formal earthly ministry. Joseph carries out his charge faithfully, and we're told that he was so good at it, and he was so diligent at it, that he will store up so much grain that they just stopped measuring it. Like, we don't have time to measure all this grain coming in. Our hands are full with just building places to store it. So just keep bringing it in, bring it in. We keep building buildings until that we finally don't have any more to have to store. Now, this is what's going on in the life of Joseph. Verses 50 through 52, we're told that Joseph has 2 sons. He marries an Egyptian woman. He has 2 sons. It's Manasseh and Ephraim. They'll come into play later on, but one more moment to kind of see what it is that's going on with Joseph. Like Jesus will receive a Gentile bride, the church made out of Gentiles. Joseph has a Gentile bride. He doesn't marry even a Canaanite, much less people his father Abraham came from. At the end of this chapter, the famine comes. It comes exactly as Joseph declared. And when the people cried out for bread, Pharaoh says, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to do, you do that. And the chapter ends this way. Joseph selling grain to the people of all the earth. It shows how incredibly expansive the famine was. Now that famine coming in, and Joseph in this place, is how we end chapter 41, and now we go into chapter 42. The famine has hit the area of Canaan, and Jacob looks at his sons. They're all looking at each other because they don't have any food and they don't have any answers. But word has reached Jacob, likely from the caravans that are going up and down from Egypt. Word has reached him that there's grain in Egypt. So I want you guys to go down to Egypt and buy some of this food so that we don't perish. Now, what's interesting is that when this famine comes, Jacob doesn't do what Abraham and Isaac did, because they both try to run from the area. Abraham goes all the way to Egypt. Isaac tried to go to Egypt, and God said, don't do that. So in this way, Jacob kind of learns a little bit from his parents. But he says, go down, but you can't take Benjamin. He's my favorite now, so you can't take him. But the 10 of you, go get us some food. In verses 6 through 25, we're told that Joseph is personally selling grain to the people. Now, there has to be so many people coming, it's unlikely that he was selling grain to every single one, but it's likely that he was selling it to people groups. He was selling it to groups of leaders and authorities that were coming in. I represent this group. He negotiates the sale with them. They come in before him. He recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. He's in the dress of an Egyptian, but even more than that, he is most likely clean-shaven. His brothers all come in with beards and mustaches. They don't recognize him at all. He's speaking through a translator, an interpreter. He's using the language of the Egyptians, not their Semitic language, so they don't recognize him. But as they come in through the interpreter, he accuses them of being spies. You've come into the land to see how you can take our stuff, and they proclaim their innocence. Now, the whole moment becomes very interesting, right? Because these are the brothers that all conspired to kill their brother, proclaiming their innocence to him. And as proof, what they do is they say this: we're all the sons of one man. Now, that's interesting. Why is that proof that you guys really are what you say that you are? And my thought is because most of them have different mothers, that they don't look like each other. And you look like this motley crew coming in to hear, oh, you guys are all spies, you're not in the same family. They're like, no, we really are. And then they start to tell them all these specifics about the family. We're all the sons of one man. There was a total of 12 of us, and one's at home and the other one's no more. What Joseph does is he throws them into prison. He declares they will not be released until this brother comes. And what he says at the beginning is, I'm going to let one of you go. Now, none of you are going to stay in jail, but one of you are going to be allowed to go back, and I want you to bring back this brother. And if you bring him, then I'll know you're telling the truth, and I'll actually sell you the grain and send you on your way. Now, they're in prison for 3 days. 3 days. Another 3-day event. But then at the end of 3 days, he does this. Big if you are honest men, you know what? One of you stay here. I was going to keep 9 of you and let one go, but I'm going to keep one of you and let 9 go. And I want you to go back to your father's house. And I'm going to let you guys take grain. And I'm doing this because I'm so nice. You're going to be carrying so much grain. You're going to need 9 guys to carry it all the way back. Carry it back to your father, then bring back Benjamin, and do not come back again until I see your brother. When the brothers hear these instructions, they speak among themselves in their Semitic language, and we're told that they believe that the situation was happening because of what they did to Joseph. Now, Joseph is listening to all this. He's listening to Reuben snap at the other ones. I told you not to sin against the boy. This is all your fault that we're in this situation. And this is the first time that Joseph is most likely learning of any of this. But they didn't know that he could understand them. He was speaking through an interpreter, and we're told in verse 24 that when he hears the conversation, he hears this torment in their heart where they feel like God is punishing them because of the evil that they did. Not the thing that we did, the evil that we did. He goes in verse 24, he weeps when he hears this conversation. And what Joseph does is he takes Simeon and releases the other. Now, this is interesting. Simeon's not the oldest. He's also not the youngest. He's the second oldest. And maybe he took Simeon because Reuben had just said, well, I tried to stick up for him. You guys wouldn't let me. And so he doesn't keep Reuben in jail or there. He keeps Simeon instead, and he releases the others. And so the others go, and then in verses 26 and 28, when they're on their way, they find out when they open their sacks, oh, they gave us back our money that we had used to buy for the grain. And now they're really scared. Now, this is interesting because we all know how great it is to wash a pair of pants and be folding it and find $5 in it. That's like found money, we're thanking God and all that kind of stuff. And they don't do any of that. Instead, they're lamenting this. What is it that God has done to us? That's what they say. And what we see is how guilty their conscience is because they are so guilty. Anything that's out of the ordinary feels like punishment, feels like a spotlight upon them. They're struggling with this back and forth, and they're mourning and asking what this means. It should seem like a blessing, but not for them. Everything's a judgment for them. In verses 29 through 38, the brothers go to Jacob, and when they return, they report everything to their father, and Jacob complains, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is functionally no more, and now you want to take my baby. You want to take him all the way to Egypt. Now, this is how chapter 42 ends, with this consternation in the heart of Jacob. And then chapter 43 begins, and then Jacob kind of looks at him and goes, all right, we're out of food again. So I want you to go back to Egypt and buy more grain. The famine was still severe, so when their stores were gone, they have nothing left. Go buy more. And now Judah speaks up on behalf of the brothers. This is super important. He's not the oldest. He's the fourth oldest. Simeon's not there, but Reuben and Levi are there, and neither one speaks up. Already we start to see this transition within the family where Judah is taking the lead among the brothers. And he says, don't you remember what that man's demands were? If you want us to get food, we have to take Benjamin. Now, what's interesting in the previous chapter, Reuben said when he says, listen, we got to do this thing if we want more food. And Jacob says no. He goes, listen, take my kids then. If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my kids. That's Reuben's deal. But now we're in the next chapter. And in this place, we see something happen. There's this shift within the family dynamic. Because in the previous one, Jacob won't let Benjamin go because Benjamin's my favorite now. Reuben says, well, kill my kids if I don't bring back your kid, but he doesn't put his life on the line. There's still this garb of selfishness that they're protecting themselves with. But then all of a sudden, Judah comes into it. He goes, I will be the surety if I don't bring back Benjamin. This is the Judah who says, you know what, it profits us nothing for us to just kill our brother. Let's make a buck. This is the same Judah who denied Tamar a future to protect his kid. This is the same one who watched his father for 13 years, for who knows how many years by this point, mourn and weep over the fact that Joseph was gone and did nothing about it. But here, all of a sudden, in this moment, in this chapter, he goes, I will be the surety. If he doesn't come back, do something to me. And the lack of selfishness in Judah in this moment is powerful, especially because it's such a contrast to everyone else inside of the family. And it's only when Jacob's personal survival is threatened that he finally agrees to let Benjamin go. Verse 14, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. But this is the beginning of the change in Judah. So they go now, 11 brothers go down to Egypt, and when they go into Joseph's presence this time, Joseph sees Benjamin, and he has his personal steward bring them into his house. So the idea seems to be that what he was doing is he's selling the grain in some kind of like marketplace or courtyard that was attached to the Pharaoh's courtyard or dwelling or throne room or something like that. Because whatever's going on, they're close enough that when Joseph starts yelling, they're all going to hear what's going on when they hear him crying out and crying. But he goes, you know what, we're going to take this out of the public view. We're going to go to my personal house. And he tells his personal steward, who does not have a name, so again, we have this beautiful back and forth going on. He says, bring them into it and get them ready for a meal. So the brothers are very nervous as they go into the personal house of Joseph, and they start trying to explain about the money that was in their sacks. And say, sir, listen, we bought this stuff last time. We gave you silver. I don't know if you remember, but when we looked in our bags, our money was there. And so we brought that money back, and we brought additional money plus gifts to buy grain this time. Now, the words of this unnamed servant are beautiful. He says, be at peace. You guys relax. Be at ease. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. He goes, I had your money. I'm the one that put it back in your bags. And it's confirmation that this was grace that they were walking into. All of a sudden, Simeon gets released out of the prison and he gets put back into the presence of his brothers. We're told that during this time, Joseph goes, he finds a place to weep as he sees Benjamin. He blesses Benjamin. He asks about him, and he goes and he finds a place to cry. This is the first time he's seen his brother in so long. And he instructs for this, again, this unnamed servant to have a meal served to the brothers. Now, he can't eat the meal with them. He's still keeping up this guise of the Egyptians. So the Egyptians couldn't eat a meal with another race because they considered themselves superior to everybody else. It would have been unclean to them, especially these dirty shepherds that are coming into their home. So they're eating in a room, and he's eating somewhere else. And what he has the steward do is he has them arrange places for everyone. I don't know if there's cards or he's just telling them where to sit, but he sits them in the ages, from the head of the table all the way to the youngest in Benjamin, and Benjamin's portion is 5 times the amount of food that the rest of them had. Now remember, this is famine conditions. Nobody else is eating this well. And the food that's prepared for Benjamin is 5 times what anybody else had. The firstborn would get a double portion. He gets a double and his regular portion for his meal. People who are better at math than me say that this is something like a 1 in a 40 million chance that this could happen accidentally, that they would all be in order Plus, he would know exactly which one was the youngest to give them the 5 times portion. This would be unnerving to the brothers. They're kind of shocked that it could be done so deliberately. Now, Joseph is doing 2 things here. He's not showing off. But what he's doing is he's unnerving them by showing a knowledge about them that he shouldn't have, but he is also testing their hearts to see if the same bitterness and the same jealousy they had towards me back then will show up here. If they're going to be like they were with Benjamin, like they were with me. He is testing the hearts of the brethren. Chapter 43 ends, chapter 44 begins, and he tells his house steward, now, listen, I want you to fill their sacks with food again. I want you to give them as much as they can carry. Fill it to the brim. Just like before, take the money, put it back in the sack, right? And I want you to put it in the mouth of the sack, so as soon as they open it up, they'll see the money immediately. But I also want you to do this. I want you to take my silver cup, and I want you to put it in the mouth of Benjamin's sack. Now, there's so many questions and so much speculation about this silver cup. Because later on, as part of his testing of the brothers, he's going to use it, he's going to claim that it is what he used for divination. Divination is when you try to determine what is going to happen or by using supernatural means to tell you what's going to happen naturally. We have no idea if Joseph actually did this or not. So why does he have it? Why does he claim it? Was it just a fancy silver cup that he had in his house or what? We don't know. We want to be always very careful that where the Bible's silent, we don't want to speak. It could be that he did practice divination, and this is something he picked up after he was coming out of prison. It is highly unlikely he had access to a silver cup when he was in prison. It could be that after he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, that he was given this cup by the wise men in the court of Pharaoh, because that's how they did it. And they're like, well, you have this power, so let me get you your own fancy silver cup so you can do this too. Or it could just be a fancy silver cup that he had in there, and it was just a prop inside of his charade. We don't know. But we do know this is going on, and Joseph tells him, he said, no, after they've gone, after they go, I want you to go and I want you to chase after him and catch up to him. And when you catch up to him, I want you to accuse them of stealing my silver cup. So the house steward does exactly what he's told. He runs after the brothers, and he speaks as instructed, and they all protest their innocence. And then they state, whoever is found with this cup, they will be put to death, and we will be your slaves. Now, where did they learn that? It's the same thing that Jacob does when Laban pursues after him. He goes, why did you steal my gods? Because what the son sees the dad do, the son does too. It doesn't stop. We're going to see this all the way through Exodus. We're going to see this with Israel when they're in the wilderness. We're going to see this later on as we go through prophet after prophet after prophet. It's the reason why there has to be judgment upon these houses, why God has to come through, and he has just to clear house in so many ways, because the children are going to continue the sins. This becomes that essence of what we're going to learn later, that the sins of the father are paid back upon the children. Not that he makes the children pay for the sins of their fathers, but that if they adopt that same culture and that same thought, then they're going to receive the same judgment too. And it goes all the way to the beginning of Israel. It's why they have to walk so closely with God if there's to be any hope. The house steward says, nope, not going to do that. I don't agree to that deal. But what I will do is whoever I find the cup with, I'm going to take that one to be a slave in the house, and the rest of the brothers will go free. And as they start going down, they search from the oldest to the youngest. This is brilliant. Because as they go through bag after bag, undoubtedly they're starting to get cockier. They're starting to get, oh, I can't wait till we get through this. I can't wait till we tell this steward off. And then they open Benjamin's bag, and what do they see? We're told the brothers just begin to mourn in grief. They rip their clothes. These are vastly different brothers than the one that threw their brother in the pit. But the old brothers would have gone, well, Benjamin, it was good knowing you. Judah, ooh, you're going to have to explain to Dad. We're all going to get out of here. That's not what they do. Instead, they all go back as a single unit all the way back to Joseph. They go in mourning. They go in tears. They go with their clothes ripped up in grief. And as they come into the presence of Joseph in verse 14, Judah and his brothers appear. And already we see again that leadership shifting to Judah. It's not Reuben and the brothers. It's Judah and the brothers. And as they appear before Joseph, Joseph starts to speak roughly to them, demanding why they would do this. Did you really think you could get away with it? Don't you know that a man such as I would have known what it is that you were trying to do? And again, this lends credibility to this, that is part of the charade. It's not something he was actually doing. Regardless, Judah explains, listen, talk to me here for a second. He asked to speak privately to Joseph away from the brothers. He's not grandstanding before anybody. This is a private conversation, as it were. And in verse 30, he says this, my father's life is bound up in the lad. And when my dad sees that we come home and we don't have his baby with us, he's going to die of grief. So let's do this, please. My Lord, let me do this. Take me as his replacement. Not my kids as his replacement, not the rest of the brothers as his replacement. Take me as his replacement and let them go home, because how can I possibly go home without the boy, only to see the evil that would overtake my dad? We wouldn't know this Judah and how much of a change it was. We didn't know the Judah that threw his brother into the pit, the Judah that tried to cheat Tamar out of a future and a hope. This is a vastly different Judah that we see in this passage. His heart is so desperately for his father in this moment, to the point that he puts himself as the sacrifice to take care of the new favorite of his dad. Chapter 45 begins, and Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. He can't contain himself anymore. That's what we're told. He can't contain himself anymore. And he kicks everyone out of the room. He just shoos them all out. And he declares to his brother who he is. And he asks if his father was alive. And again, here's the heart of Joseph. The first thing that he says to his brother after he says, it is your brother, he asks about his dad. He doesn't go, it's me, Joseph. Let me tell you what's been happening to me. His heart is still for others. His heart is for his father. They don't believe it. We're told that they're dismayed as his presence. They don't know what to do with this new information. So Joseph starts to reveal details that only they would know. I am the brother sold into Egypt when the traders were heading to Egypt. Now, nobody else knew that. They weren't telling. Jacob shows no sign of knowing, and if they told anyone else in the house, gossiping lips are going to be gossiping lips. He's going to hear about it. This is something only they, and not even Benjamin knew, but Joseph did. He tells his brothers, do not be grieved, do not be angry, for God sent me ahead of you in order to preserve life. Now, this is going to be a beautiful thing. We're going to see the perfect manifestation. I submit that to you, the perfect manifestation of this idea in chapter 50. But this moment is beautiful and power, because this is why the cupbearer forgot about him for 2 years. Because if he remembered about Joseph right away, and he went and told Pharaoh, and Pharaoh showed him favor, and Pharaoh let him out of the prison, then he would have been back with his family in Canaan just in time to die of starvation like the rest of them. He had to be forgotten about for 2 years in a prison, 2 years in a dungeon. This was the only way for the family to have hope and to preserve life. Joseph reveals to him there's still 5 more years of famine to go. We've only gone through 2 years of this. Now, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go get Dad. Go get the whole household and bring them here to Egypt where I can keep them safe. Pharaoh hears that this was Joseph's family. And we're told that it pleased him to be able to bless Joseph's family. He didn't look at it and go, oh, great, more mouths to feed. He goes, I am so excited to be able to bless your family. Long have I desired to see them. So what he tells them is, I want you to bring the whole family down. Go and get your household and bring them here. And in verse 18, he says, do not concern yourself with your stuff, for I will give you the fat of the land. Now, I love this, but my favorite portion is in verse 20, and it's my second favorite verse in the chapter, or in the entire book of Genesis. It says, the best of the land is before you. Now, this is the heart of the authority that's over Joseph. And again, if we go to our parallel, and this becomes like Jesus, this is the heart of the Father for us when the Father tells the Son, go and bring your bride and bring him here. And don't worry about your stuff. Don't worry about things that you have in the land. Just come to me. The best of the land is before you. The brothers go to their father at the end of chapter 45, and at first he has a hard time believing them, but when he sees them come with the convoy in the wagon that Joseph had sent for him, he starts to believe. But he still has doubts. This is the underlying current that's going on in the beginning of chapter 46, because God has to come to him. And he says, listen, I know you've been trying to stay in this land ever since you went to Padanaram, or you were in that area with Laban, and you have stayed in the land. You have stayed close to us. But now I need you to go to Egypt. I need you to trust me on this. And he assures him that he is the God of Jacob's father, that he's going with him to Egypt. Do not be afraid. And then he tells Jacob that I'm going to go with you. I'm going to bring you back to the promised land. And Joseph, the son you haven't seen in 20 some odd years, is going to be the one who will close your eyes. Now, in verses 8 through 27, we have the genealogy of the household of Jacob. We're given a list of the 66 people that are here. And the purpose of this is to show us that a total number of 70 people are going to go into Egypt. And the reason we're told that, so we can compare later on in Exodus when they're all coming out, and we're told that 600,000 men plus women and children are coming out. They go in as 70. They come out with something close to 1.8 to 2.4 million people. This is going to happen over the course of 430 years. In verses 27 through 30, they start traveling down there, and as they're getting close, what we're going to see is Jacob sends Judah to Joseph to act as a guide to the land that Joseph had in mind for his family. Now, this is where you need both Judah and Joseph to show us the image of Jesus, because they're both going to act as types of Jesus as they go into the land. Judah's necessary. He's going to be the guide that brings them into the land. He is the one bringing the family to this promised land that's going to give them safety during the time of the famine. But there has to be a type of Jesus already inside the land to give them a place to belong. And so Joseph acts as this type of Jesus, going to bring the family and bring them to a special place just for them so they can be safe and they will be kept separate from the Egyptians around them. The family was guided to Goshen, which was prime grazing land in the Nile Delta. It meant that as long as they were there, they would always have access to water. Very, very important in that region. As Joseph is getting them into the land, he tells them that he's going to tell Pharaoh that they have come. And when he tells them about them and they appear before him, he says, listen, I want you to tell them that you're shepherds. I'm going to tell them you're shepherds, and you're going to tell them you're shepherds. Now, this is not a lie. This is not a manipulation of the facts. It's truth. They were shepherds. Because I need you to make sure that you mention and stress that you're shepherds. Because this particular job is abhorrent. It's disgusting to the Egyptians. And they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. They're going to be very polite for my sake. But this way I can keep you in the best grazing land in the entire country, but also keep you separate. Because Joseph understands too, we don't belong here. This isn't our land. We have a promised land that we are going to. And this will keep us separate and from being absorbed by the Egyptians. In chapter 47, Joseph introduces his brothers to Pharaoh. He only brings 5 of them. We don't know why. We don't know which ones. We can assume that Judah is part of the group, but beyond that, we don't really know. Maybe Judah, maybe Benjamin. Regardless, he asks about them, and they explain we're shepherds going back generations, verse 3, to make sure we're not just shepherds today. We're sons of shepherds, and we're sons of shepherds. And they're in Egypt because there's no pasture land due to the famine. And Pharaoh tells Joseph, listen, I want you to settle them wherever you think is best, wherever's best for them. And if there's any capable men in the family, put them in charge of my livestock too. It shows this ongoing care to them, but it's doubling down with them. They're going to have access to the absolute best resources in the land. Then in verse 7 through 10, Joseph presents his dad to Pharaoh. He brings Jacob, and then Jacob immediately blesses Pharaoh. Now, this is a beautiful image. It's going to pay dividends if we notice it now when we go through Exodus, because as they come into the land, the family comes into the land, the patriarch is going to bless Pharaoh. When they go out of the land, and Pharaoh goes, get out of here after the 10th plague, he goes, get out of here, take your kids, take your stuff, and bless me too as you leave. So they bless as they come in, and they're asked to bless as they go out. We don't know if Moses actually blesses them or not, but that's the request. Verses 11 through 12, Joseph provides for his family. Verses 13 through 26, we're told how Joseph was negotiating with the people for food. Now, there's a 3-tier event that's going to happen here when it comes to the food. First, the people give their money for food. When they run out of money, then they give their livestock for food. And then when they run out of that, they exchange themselves and their land for food. It shows us how deep the famine went. But what the famine did is it eroded everything from the people until they had nothing left, until they had to sell themselves into indentured servant to Pharaoh just to have any hope for success. But not the Israelites. Not the ones who were protected and provided for by Joseph. In verses 27 through 30, we're told that the house of Jacob, under the protection of Joseph, continued to prosper and grow while in Egypt, even under famine conditions. Near the end of Jacob's life, he's called Jacob and Israel back and forth in this passage. It's kind of interesting. It's a good dynamic if you wanted to study it. But he had Joseph come before him, and he has him place his hand under his thigh. So reminiscent of Genesis 24 with the unnamed servant with Abraham, put your hand under my thigh and make an oath to me, son. Do not bury me here in the land. This is not where we belong. Promise me, you will bury me into the burial place of my fathers. That's verses 29 through 36. And that is going to be Hebron, where Abraham was buried, where Sarah was buried, where Isaac was buried, and where Leah was buried. In chapter 48, we see the beginning of Jacob's last words to his sons, but he with Joseph. Joseph's told, listen, your dad's really, really sick. You need to go see him. He doesn't have much time left. So he goes and he takes his sons with him. Now, this becomes the foundation of what follows. What Jacob does in this moment is the sons come to him. Jacob claims the first two sons of Joseph as his own. Now watch the dynamic. He takes the two kids of Joseph, and he says, now they're my kids. He's going to put them on the same standing as Simeon and Levi, or Reuben and Simeon, or whatnot, right? What this is going to allow Jacob to do is give Joseph a double portion of blessing, because now I'm going to bless two of your kids that are going to come through your line, a double portion of blessing, even though he knows that Joseph's not the firstborn and he cannot give the birthright to Joseph. Now, this is going to be huge when we get to the next chapter, see the blessing/oracles of Jacob. But what Jacob is doing is he understands how God works. That just because you're the oldest doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the one with the birthright. God chooses who he chooses. And he has great love for Joseph, but he's not going to break the rules for Joseph. Jacob's learned a lot by this point. And he claims, these two kids are going to be my kids, and I'm going to bless them. And in verses 8 through 22, Jacob blesses the boys in the name of the God of his fathers and the God who has been his shepherd all of his life. It's a beautiful, beautiful line. And then he puts his hands on the boys, and he goes to bless them. But the idea seems to be that he crosses his hands or something like that, but he puts his right hand on Ephraim's head, which is the younger. He puts his left hand on Manasseh's head. Most people being right-handed, especially during that time, the right hand was considered the hand of your strength, your power, so whichever hand you put your right hand on was the most blessing that you were going to give. And Joseph sees this, and he goes, no, Dad, you got it wrong. Your eyesight's going back here. Let me switch your hands back. He goes, no, what I've done, I've done. Here's one of those areas where the father has learned what the son has not. But God's blessing is upon who he chooses, and he says, yes, Manasseh is going to be a great kid, a great nation is going to come from him, but the nation that comes from Ephraim is going to be greater than the older. In chapter 49, he moves from just addressing Joseph and his two sons, and now he goes to address all of the sons. Now, it's not fair to say that what he's going to do is bless all the sons, because some of these are just going to be horrible. But what he's doing is he's going to tell them what will befall you. So it's more oracle than it is blessing. He calls others, we can tell them what's going to happen. And all of the blessings there, all the prophecies are there for you to be able to go through. But let me point out just a couple. Reuben's the oldest. He should get the birthright. He should get the double blessing. And he's flat out told, you are disqualified because you slept with my wife. Then the next two come up, and they should be next in line, right? Well, Simeon, I'm the next oldest. I get the blessing. He goes, no. He lumps both of them together, and he says, you are both disqualified because of the anger in your heart. Now, what is interesting of these two, Simeon is going to become a very small tribe, but Levi is going to become the priestly tribe. Moses is going to come out of that. And I have to wonder, and this is just Anthony's speculation, does this mean that Simeon was the ringleader when they did that massacre at Shechem, and Levi was just the toady who didn't know when to say no? I don't know. Regardless, we come to Judah. Judah has the second longest oracle given to him. The only one that surpasses him is the one that's given to Joseph. And what we need to focus on and definitely understand that it is told to Judah that the scepter to rule will come out of your family. This means the birthright of the family goes to Judah. Not Reuben, not Simeon, not Levi, not even Joseph. Joseph. I mean, that's like the perfect kid. Which of us wouldn't want a Joseph coming out of our family? That's the one you can be proud of. You put on the front of the Christmas card. But he's not the one. But it's Judah, the one who started out wicked, but in the moment when it counted, he goes, Let me be the sacrifice, the one who becomes the intercessor for his brother. That's the one who receives the birthright. That doesn't mean that Joseph comes out of it with a short handle. He gets a very lengthy oracle, a beautiful blessing. Jacob even transfers the blessings giving to him to Joseph. He doesn't do that for Judah, but Judah does get the birthright. But then in his final words, verses 29 through 33, Jacob tells him this. He charges his son to bury him at Hebron. And when he charges the entire family, he already made Joseph swear, right? But he charges all of the brothers. Now, it's all your responsibility. It's not just on Joseph. You guys are going to do it as a unit. And after he's done this, we're told that he draws his feet up into the bed. So he goes and he pulls the blanket over him, and then he dies. Seems that he does this in their presence. In chapter 50, in the first couple of verses, we're told that Joseph weeps over Jacob. He holds him and he kisses him. He falls on his face. So again, we have that fulfillment of Genesis 46, that your son Joseph will close your eyes. So in this moment, we see the fulfillment of that Joseph is there, he's weeping over him, and he closes his father's eyes. Joseph has his father's body embalmed, right? That is an Egyptian procedure, and especially for Egyptian royalty, not just for anybody, but it's done for Jacob. This is how not only Joseph saw his father, but all the people saw Jacob. And we know this is true because the embalming process was about 40 days, and we're told that the Egyptians mourned for Jacob for 70 days, which likely means that for 40 days was the embalming process, and then the 30 days that the Semitics would mourn somebody. We'll see this later on with Moses. When they mourn for Moses, they mourn him for 30 days. But total, the Egyptians will mourn for him for 70 days. Now, this is super important. This shows what a great sign of respect for Jacob the Egyptians had for him, because it was knocking on the door for how you mourned for high royalty. When they mourned for a pharaoh that passed away, they mourned for 72 days. So this is just 2 days less than they would for the Pharaoh. It shows what high esteem they would hold him in. After the mourning period was over, Joseph asked Pharaoh for permission to go and bury his father at Hebron. Even Joseph, with all of his power, he still is humble enough to ask for permission to go. He said, I'm going to go. I'll come back. And Pharaoh says, go. Go, take your family with you. And they go with everyone who could travel. And we're told that they go with chariots and horsemen as a great company. The people of the land noticed this caravan coming through. They even rename one of the places where they stopped to mourn. They call it the grievous mourning for the Egyptians. The brothers all come together. They bury Jacob at Hebron as Jacob had charged them. But then in verses 15 through 21, we have this moments where the brothers are talking among themselves, and they go, you know what, Dad's gone now. And there's kind of nobody to keep Joseph in check. And maybe, just maybe, Joseph is like Esau. When he found that he had been cheated by his brother, he says, wait till my dad's dead and there's no one to stop me, and I am going to kill my brother. And so what they do is they come together, and we don't know if Jacob actually told them to do this or not, but they send a message to Joseph and say, listen, before Dad died, he kind of told us he wanted us to do something. He wanted us to come to you and say, please forgive us for our transgressions. Now, Joseph weeps when he hears the message, and I wonder why, but again, it shows that beautiful heart of Jesus. This is the heart of Jesus when he's on that cross and he's crying out, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Was he weeping for them because it was like, they still don't understand me? Was he weeping for them because they were still in bondage to their fear, despite all that he had done for them, all the ways that he had blessed them, all the ways he had provided for them and their little ones? They still didn't trust him. But he didn't leave them in their fear. Instead, what he does is he calls them to him, and they come before him, and they fall down before him, and they say, we are your servants. And he goes, don't do that. Am I in the place of God? Am I your judge? Then he tells them, verse 20, the absolute best verse in all of Genesis. If you do not have it marked, please mark it. But Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, he tells them that what you meant for evil, God meant for good in order to preserve the life of many people. Now that is so important. The verse is super heavy laden because God didn't make good for me, and God didn't make good just for you, but God made good out of evil to preserve life. His desire to save. He tells him, don't be afraid, because now I'm going to provide for you. Yeah, Dad's gone. Yeah, Judah's going to lead the family. But I'm in a position to bless you. And when you had a position of power, you threw me into a pit. But now I have the position of power, and I will be the one to bless you. At the end of the chapter, we're given the end of the life of Joseph. He lives to 110 years old, so he's significantly younger than his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather, but he lives to see his great-grandkids. When he starts to reach the end of his life, what he does is he brings the sons of Israel to him. Now, this is brilliant what he does. His brothers come to him, those that are surviving, but they come to him, and he makes the sons of Israel swear, you're going to carry my bones out of Egypt, and you're going to bury them into the promised land. Now, this is brilliant. This is really clever by what it is that Joseph does, because what he doesn't do is say, okay, you guys that are living have the responsibility to do this. He knows we are not back. He understands there's going to be a large gap of time. If he already understood it from what it is that he heard through Abraham all the way down to Joseph, we just don't know, but he understood it was going to be a gap. So what he does is he says, all the descendants of our father Jacob, it is your responsibility, your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids, whoever's here, when you guys leave, you make sure you take my bones out of here. And the bones of Joseph will be taken from Egypt by Moses in Exodus chapter 13, and they will eventually be buried at Shechem, Joshua 24. This concludes the book of Genesis. One down, 65. But this is the beauty of the book. It's the book of beginnings. It's the book of deliverance. It's the book of how God already has a plan to deliver those that are his, that are find themselves in that place of sin that they have willingly, wantedly gone into. And yet, at the very beginning of the book, he is already declaring, I am going to make a way for you. So don't hold on to the stuff of this world. Come home. The best of the land is before you. We're going to have one last song of worship, and I'll pray in just a second, but I want to thank you guys for going on this journey with me. I know asking 3 years of you is asking a lot. We're going so unbelievably fast. But I am your guide, not your teacher. I'm a friend and fellow servant. I am another disciple along with you. The point of this is not to learn what I have to say about the Bible. It's to learn what God will show you when you study his Bible. For some of you, you have never gone through every chapter like this. You have never had to either teach it or study it in this fashion, and it is going to be brand new for you. For some of you, you have studied it from beginning to end over and over again, so you know all the nooks and crannies, and you see all the things that I'm missing. That's awesome. I want it to agitate you enough that you want to teach somebody else, because the whole point of this entire thing in online church, I'm talking to you guys too, the whole purpose of AC3 is not to fill your head with knowledge, it's to fill your head with knowledge to go pour into somebody else, because now by this point, you are well equipped to go teach somebody else the book of Genesis. So who are you teaching about the Lord? Who are you telling about his word? Because now you're all responsible with this information. And this is what our God does with us. So, Father, we love you. Mighty God, I thank you. I thank you for your way to show us our proper position before you without crushing us or humiliating us. It would be so easy to do, Lord. You know everything about us, Father. We are nothing to stand in your presence at all. And yet you love us, and you elevate us, and you bring us to this place of capability. You give us gifting, Lord, and you pour into us your word, your precious word. What would you ask us to do next? What would you place upon our heart? How would you ask us to go? Father, there is no one like you, and there is no one but you. And so we come before you as the brothers went to Joseph, and we say it with all honesty, we are your servants, Lord. We belong only to you. So have your way with us, both those that are here, Lord, and I thank you for so much for those that are in this room, but Father, for those that are online, and we'll watch this later as well, because we belong to you. You are the King. You purchased us at a price. And so whatever you want to do next, Father, place it upon our heart and give us the boldness and courage to step out in faith. Lord, we love you so much. Please be with us and bless us as we go. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mr. Pedro, if you would, sir.